Good morning, everybody. Thank you for your patience if you've been waiting online. Slight delay with technical issues around the streaming. So, welcome to the Children's Scrutiny panel for Kirklees Council on Friday, the 17th of January 2020, starting at 11:10. Just start off with a round of introductions. So, I'm Andrew Marchington, chair of the panel.
Helen Kilroy, Governance Officer.
Councillor Paul White, panel member.
Linda Summers, Statutory Co-optee.
Dale O'Neill, Voluntary Co-optee.
Tom Brailsford, Service Director for Resources Improvement and Partnerships.
Mary White, Commissioning and Partnerships Manager with Children's Services.
Morning, I'm Julie Bragg, I'm the Head of Service for the Children and Care and Care Leavers Service.
Morning, I'm Mel Meggs, I'm the Director for Children's Services.
Hello, I'm Joanne Sanders, Service Director for Learning and Early Support.
Hello, and I'm Carol Patterson, Portfolio Holder for Learning, Aspiration and Communities.
Thank you. The agenda is as printed. Membership of the committee. We received some apologies for the committee today.
Apologies have been received from Councillor Paul Davis, Amanda Pinnock, Richard Smith and co-optee Tony Bromley.
Thank you. Item 2, if we look at the minutes of the previous meeting, can we approve those as a correct record of that meeting? Yes, thank you. Those are approved. Item 3, any members of the committee got declarations of interest on items on the agenda? No. Item 4, this is a meeting in public. There are no items on the agenda from which we need to exclude the public. And we have received no notifications for deputations or petitions. As there are no members of the public here, we've not got public question time. So we're on to item 7, number and age of children in care. I'm going to hand over to Julie for that.
Morning. Yes, I start my report. So, looking at the figures at the end of November 2019, we continue to have a rise in the number of children that are coming into care. Although we're having this rise, I have to say that we still... Oh, okay, sorry. Is that better? Okay, thank you. I'm a little bit scared of technology and microphones. So we continue to have a rise of the numbers of the children coming into care. However, we do continue to remain in line below our statistical neighbours with regards to those numbers. And just to give you a little bit of an overview, when we break them down into ages, we have currently a number 143 children in care under the age of 4. And what I will say about that age group is that the likelihood of them remaining in care are quite low, because often in the situation of children that are under 4, often we will achieve either a plan to return to their birth parents or a plan for adoption. Just to give you some idea of some of the things that are happening in the service, we're having an improvement of children who are coming into care, who then become looked after by family members, subject to special guardianship orders, so no longer children in our care. And those are increasing numbers in some of the work that's been happening within the service. We also at the moment are, and again looking at the age, so if we look at the age ranges 11 to 15, quite a significantly high number. But what we're doing within the service at the moment is we're currently implementing the NSPCC reunification package, because what we find is that children of that age, as they're moving towards adolescence, moving towards 15, 16-year-old, often will gravitate back to live with birth parents. So within the reunification package, that helps us to do much more robust assessment, much more planning around the success of that reunification. So we're looking more in how circumstances have changed for birth parents. So we will see an increasing number of children that are returning to the care of their parents, where and if appropriate that it's safe to do that. I think if we just continue through the report, we continue to reduce the number of children that are placed more than 20 miles outside of Kirklees, and historically that has been a problem for us, but there is much more robustness, much more scrutiny when we're looking at placements, when we're looking at the needs of the children, and when we're looking at children returning to the Kirklees area, much more robustness around the planning around that. So again, a good indicator in terms of the reduction in the numbers. Okay, thank you.
Right. Questions or comments for Julie on the children care report? Dale.
On the age breakdown, the number of children less than 1 year, that number is rising. Do we know why?
More recently, we've had an increase in our numbers of pre-birth assessments where pre-birth assessment has taken place in terms of the need for, and for some reason, and we don't always know why that happens, some points of the year we have higher numbers of pregnancies and pre-birth assessments, and we've just had recently a number of pre-birth assessments where the plan has been for the child to come into care for lots of different reasons. The assessment has highlighted the need for that. So there isn't it's difficult to be very specific why now, why November, why January. That is the reason why the increase recently of our numbers of under 1-year-olds.
I'd like to say that I find this quite alarming.
Okay.
Yeah, so perhaps we need to be having a bit more detail about why that's happening. I'll pick that up in briefings, Dale, and then we might discuss that at a future panel meeting. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, okay. Yeah, sorry, Linda.
Can I just ask you a question about the final section of your report about semi-independent accommodation? And in one respect, that's reassuring, because where those children are placed is not a million miles away, is it? They're all in neighbouring local authorities, effectively. So it strikes me as not a distance issue, particularly there. But there are 44 children living in unregulated accommodation. Why would it ever be appropriate to put children in unregulated accommodation?
I think it's the understanding of unregulated accommodation and the differences between a regulated children's registered home and unregulated. There are differences, and I'm very aware at the moment that nationally it is an issue for us. I can assure you that it becomes, because I think it's real difficult to explain. It's the difference between a registered children's home and some of the things that the staff within that home would do for a young person, and what that means. So for 16 plus accommodation, that is around a natural progression of move for our children in care to move towards independence. And I think unregulated is the wrong word to use. It is a placement that is appropriate for a 16-year-old with their needs, and the staff that work within those premises are there to help and to support a young person to make that transition from being in care to being independent. I'm looking around at other people in the room that would like to maybe add to perhaps answering that question in a different way.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we're all worried about what we see in the headlines, particularly about young people being left at the ages of 16 and 17. I think some of the headlines, to be fair, were children under the age of 16 that were in unregulated prison. We never have children under the age of 16 left living in what we would call semi-independent accommodation. So as part of a child's plan, as they move from 16 through to 18, they develop a pathway plan. And part of that is about working with them about when do we think it's right, particularly for those who have been in children's homes. It happens less for children who have been in foster care, but for children who have been in children's homes, when do we think it's right for them to be able to live without the same level of support that they would get in a children's home? So between the ages of 16 and 18, at varying times, we'll see that, which much much more likely to be at 17. Sometimes that's because we want a child to live closer to their community and the accommodations there. Some children don't do very well in children's homes. The regulations around how you look after a child in a children's home is very difficult for some children, and actually they thrive when they move into supported accommodation. So I know, for instance, of children who have, at the ages of 17, been running away and going missing from being in a full children's home, move them into supported accommodation, and actually they're there every night. They're really proud of where they're living. They make really great strides in terms of their well-being. So there's no sort of one-size-fits-all. And I think Julie's right that we've had this debate nationally about unregulated and unregistered, and sometimes mix the two things up. It's absolutely wrong to have children, particularly under the age of 16, and where possible under the age of 18, in unregistered children's homes. It's unlawful. And in fact, we're working with the police, West Yorkshire Police at the moment, and Ofsted, to look at ensuring that we don't, that we challenge unregistered homes. And in fact, Ofsted have been out and done some checks for us on supported accommodation and found that they were absolutely working in the law. We also have a quality assurance process. So when we commission places, we don't just put a child anywhere. We will want to make sure that their staff are well trained, have had all of the right checks that they have, and are working well. And very often we will have children living in our area who have been placed by other authorities. So some of the more recent incidents where I've needed to get involved because we've been worried about the welfare of children living in supported accommodation has actually been children placed by other local authorities in private provision here. So it is a complex issue. We are working on it. We've reviewed actually every child that we've got very recently that's living in supported accommodation, and I think that's the word that we should call it. It's supported accommodation. There are well qualified staff living there helping those young people to develop the independent skills that they need. We are reviewing that to make sure that we're not asking those staff to do things for which a parent needs to do, because if we're going to do that, then they should be in a children's home. And so we've assured ourselves that we haven't got any children who we're asking them to provide care for, because if that's the case, they should be in a foster home or a children's home. And then we're working to make sure that we've got some of our own internal provision, which we have, but also what does good provision look like in the next few years for children in that age range. So I liken it to children going to university at 18 and in halls of residence, and and it's more than that. They get more support than that, but actually we do allow our young people to move on and take steps into independence. And for some children that works really well, and as I'm experiencing on a personal level, for some children they find that more difficult, having still doing the washing for a 19-year-old. So again, we have to keep that under review, and their pathway plans are kept under review. So for those 40-odd children, they will be kept under very close review, and if we think their needs change, then we'll change their placement accordingly.
That's very reassuring, thank you. And did these children still have contact with their own social worker within Kirklees? That relationship continues?
Yeah, absolutely. So every child has an allocated social worker up to they're 18, and they'll also be co-worked. They'll have a personal advisor as well from the Leaving Care Service who'll start to get involved as they're approaching that age, so that we have a really good transition over. Absolutely we do. And the homes will still do things like report them missing. If they're not there, they'll ring us if they think that there's an issue. We have a really good, we try and nurture really good relationships. They also have their care overseen by someone called an independent reviewing officer. And the independent reviewing officers are really important because they have a direct report to the courts. So if they thought we weren't doing our job properly, they have an opportunity to escalate the quality of those children's cares to the court system, and are there really on behalf of the court. They're our employees, so we always have an interesting relationship with them, but it might be worth in the future Scrutiny having a report from the independent reviewing officers about how they challenge social workers to make sure that the quality of care is. So we have our, they sit with Tom, so they sit outside the social work service. They're not managed by the social work service. That's been a recent movement, and that's to give them a level of independence so that they can escalate concerns. But they're really the person that has to make sure that everybody who's looking after that child is doing what they need to do to keep them safe and to help them really grow into the adults we want them to be, really.
Thank you, Julie, Mel, for those. Any? All right. Oh, we've got some more questions. Paul.
Chair, thank you. I'm just commenting a question, really, in terms of the children placed outside Kirklees, and we've discussed this before, and I think it's really pleasing that we've made such good progress on this. It seems to have stuck a bit, and I'm just wondering where our ambition or target is in terms of reducing it even further from this figure of 80.
Well, we continually review the children placed outside of the area. I think sometimes some of the, should I say, the stuckness of it is often that, and we have reviewed all our children that place out there, and what we have to look at and be mindful of that some children and young people have made their networks within that area. They have friends, they form friendships, they're within school, and so when we look at a children placed outside, it is about their individual needs and whether that is appropriate for them to return back to Kirklees, and in some cases that's not the case. So I think why we've got some stuckness is because of the review that we've been doing and monitoring and robustly looking at placing more children out of the area. I think that will probably suggest that that's where some of the stuckness is. So the children that are out of that area in the main now don't want to come back at this point in time. We will never stop looking at that, and we will continue to review, because sometimes as children, as I said earlier on, when they move towards adolescence, they then sometimes can change their way of thinking.
Sorry, and I think it's worth saying as well in terms of our ambition really would be to place as few as possible children and young people outside Kirklees, and one of the things we're trying to do about that is look at the sufficiency of our accommodation, but also the sufficiency of our services, so that there may well be children and young people with needs that we can meet better locally. So we're looking at a number of creative ways of how we can do that, really, particularly in residential.
Sorry, I think just to be specific, so our aspiration is that no children go out of area, and I think it's probably going to take us about 5 years to get to that place. So there's something about how we've stopped, and we have stopped. So actually, it might be useful to have some of the data about how many we send out each month now for a new placement. So Julie's talking about that group of 80 are already placed. But actually, if you saw some of the data, you'll see over the last year a huge reduction in the number that we send out. But of course, for those 80, it's probably going to take us about 5 years to move through that. And there are a small number, very small number of authorities that have no children placed outside of their area. And we're just actually talking to one of those locally about how we can put the right things in place to get us to that point. So that's the aspiration, really, that we never have to make that decision, because we have got enough needs. For children who are in our care, that's different for children who may need to go out for their education or other types of needs. But so I would expect in 5 years' time that should be at zero, and we should be confident that it will remain at zero.
We'll bring you in a minute, Dale. Can I just, because we've said in the past occasionally it's absolutely appropriate to place a child out of area because we want them to be further away from certain situations. So we are envisaging a time when even for those children who we want to be away from their immediate community for a period of time, we will be able to facilitate that within Kirklees.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, and so we will want to facilitate that in Kirklees. So there is something, and as I say, we're looking at these other authorities that have been able to do that. They've been able to, even with great risk. So what they might do is move someone out of their area for 6 weeks while the police arrest whoever it is that's causing the risk to the child, and then bring them back. The issue that we have sometimes is we move a child out, they settle and they stay out, and then we can't bring them back. So there's a different way of working. So knowing those children will have a disruption, but it will be very early in their care journey, and then we bring them back, and we can whilst at the most and earliest appropriate time. So when we say never, what we mean is never permanently be out of the area. Yeah.
So it's that permanent arrangement, and I suppose in light of what you've said about the initial issues of partnership working to make sure that everybody's dealing with initial incidents can deal with that as quickly and as effectively as possible to make sure that they've got stability for the child. That's fine. Is that right? Fine. Okay. Sorry. Dale.
I really appreciate the regularity in which we're updated on the statistical data about our children in care. It's comprehensive and it has some very important stories to tell. What I don't know, I think we don't know, is how our young people think and feel about the experience of being in care. My question is, from their own words, do you know what they think and how they feel? And if you do, can we please know?
Okay, we know in a number of ways in terms of their children and their feelings and experience of being in care through the work that we undertake with them whilst they're in care, in terms of the direct work, in terms of helping them to understand their situation and the situations why they're in care. And often that can take a period of time to be able to do that and to work with the child and the young person to understand that. We have within the service close contact with our children in care through lots of different forums where we're able to listen to their voice, listen to their experiences. An example, Children Care Forum the other night, colleagues were there to talk about the fostering service, and so we constantly listen through what they have to say, which is obviously a real focus on us and how we then provide, how we improve our service provisioning through what we do. If you would like to hear some more information around that, then that's perhaps something that we can look at for more detail for you in terms of what children say about their experiences. But I have to say, it is constantly at the forefront of our mind to listen to their experiences and what they're saying, because that's the only way we can improve it for them in terms of their lived experience of being a child in care.
The reason I asked it is that we have been looking at the statistical data for a long time, and I still think, what do they say? And, you know, I know you must have ways of assessing what they're thinking, how they're feeling, but you haven't shared it with us. And if there's a way that you can share it with us, I would really appreciate that.
I think there was a presentation to the last corporate parenting board, a video presentation. So if that's not been shared with members of Children's Scrutiny panel, I think, Helen, if we could do...
It's coming in February.
It's coming in February. So that would address that particular... It was very good, yeah, there's a bit snippets of children's voice in there, video snippets and stuff, so, yeah. I think the issue is about periodic, when we do that, and then, yeah, are we getting that? How regular would we want that? We know that children's voice should be part of everything that we do, so whether we want to, want to include something on each report, just a small story, we get the verbal updates, it might be worth, just to show that we are fulfilling that commitment, to have something on each programme that gives us a snippet of children's voice. Tom?
I think it's worth saying as well, I think it's a really good point, and I think bringing more qualitative stuff in would be really important, and alongside children's voice actually sits under my directorate now, so we're going to be doing some more work about how we systemically involve children's voice across the board and bring it into decision making. So I think that's a really important point, and there's lots of good work going on and lots of qualitative information we've got that's helping us make decisions about services, and but actually I think it's a good point, we need to bring that in, but I think we also need to do that for the widest sense. So it's how, as children's services, are we involved in children's voice and embedding children's voice in decisions across the whole of children's services as well.
Can I ask you a different question now? It's not touched on in your report, but I think you mentioned it in your initial remarks about special guardianship orders. And I think you said, but correct me if it's wrong, that you've seen something of an increase in those, in placing children with the wider family, effectively. Do you continue to support the wider family once the order's been made, to ensure that relationship embeds, and how does that work?
Okay, yes, we do, is the answer to the question. We have I have to say that in Kirklees, I'm very, very proud of what we call our Connected Carers support team. So we continue to support children who are living, first of all, to make the transition to live with their birth family. Often children initially will be subject to care orders, and when carers feel confident, we'll work with them to for that to become a special guardianship order, because that's, for a child's lived experience, that is much more a normal family life for them. And we have an excellent support team, so within that support team we continue to support. Some of the issues for children that are living with family members are often around contact and how we continue to manage for them to continue to have a relation with their birth parents and the contact around that. So that's an example of, we have contact officers within the team that work to help to support families to be able to move that into a more natural environment within the family. The Connected Carer support team will support with, family support in terms of, we'll support with parenting for some of our carers. We have to consider that a lot of our carers may be grandparents who haven't parented their own children. So it is very much about what the needs of that family is and what the needs are in terms of their support needs. I have to say that a lot of envy within the West Yorkshire area, because we've got a very good, very embedded and well-established Connected Carers support team. They, for example, just some of the things that we've done recently, the Christmas party for the children. So we regularly have Halloween, Easter parties for the children who are living with Connected Carers. We have been working very closely with Grandparents Plus, who are an independent organisation. And what they've helped our Connected Carers to achieve is their own support group, so that they can have their own group separately from the local authority. So we've done lots of work over the last 12 months of improving that, and we have some very, very well established that they run the support groups themselves. They meet regular. Once we at a point where a family feel that they no longer need our support, then we will no longer be involved. But what carers need to know is that they can always come back to us, that isn't forever and ever in the day. There may be a situation that arises that they can make contact with, and we can reinstate the work that we're doing. And obviously in terms of financial support, that is reviewed on an annual basis in terms of the financial support that carers get. I like to sing the praises of our services in Kirklees wherever I go, because we do really have an excellent service. It's maybe something that maybe people, you may want to look at in more detail by coming along and look at some of the events that we provide.
Any further questions or comments? Right. Thank you very much for all the responses. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for the responses. Right. We're going to move on now to item 8. One of our key themes for inquiry this year and going onwards is partnership working, scrutinising partnerships. So we're looking at the Kirklees Children and Young People's Partnership Plan. So handing over to Mary and to Tom for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm here today to talk about our relaunch of the Children's Partnership and to introduce the draft Children's Plan to you, to seek your views and your comments around that, really. To give you a bit of background, the Children and Young People's Partnership was relaunched last Easter. The partnership had been paused for about 18 months while we'd been going through intervention, because it was felt that we should really focus attention and resources onto the looked after children, the safeguarding cohort, and what was happening with the improvement board. So that broad cross-sector partnership was paused at that time. The other thing that's happened in more recent times is that the Children and Young People's Partnership is no longer statutory, so we don't have to do it, but we choose to do it because we see some real value in working right the way across the system that supports children and young people to try to support our ambition about giving children in Kirklees the best start in life. So we relaunched back last Easter with an event that we invited about 200 different organisations and individuals to, and about 80 of those chose to come along. And we were asking a very open question, really, two open questions. One was what's it like to be a child in Kirklees? And the other was, what's the point of partnership? Do you want to have a partnership? So we spent that session looking at a whole lot of really interesting evidence from the Joint Strategic Assessment, from the Young People's Health Survey, from information from the Voice and Influence team, from service feedback about what children and young people had to say about their experiences, and what we know from a raft of information and insight and statistics about what's going on for children and young people, and what outcomes do they achieve, and where they don't achieve those equally, who are the groups that are doing best, who are the groups that are not doing as well, what are some of the interventions that could change, and where have we really got issues in the system that we think we need to shift things. So as a result of that session, we decided that we did want to have a partnership, but we wanted that to be a different sort of thing. We didn't want it to be a closed committee anymore with formal agendas and minutes and so on. We wanted it to be an open forum, non-hierarchical, so whether people were a senior leader or a frontline worker, they were welcome to join in the Children's Partnership. And that was partly on the experience of that first session, where there was a really good cross-fertilisation of people working at different levels and in different organisations, and we could recognise the richness of having that sort of insight. So we decided that we'd go ahead with the Children's Partnership, we'd make that an open forum, and that we'd do that in a way that provided challenge and support to each other, that wasn't hierarchical, where there was some central support from the council, but the council isn't a leader of the Children's Partnership. We simply have sort of more resources to work with others to enable that to happen. Because we were looking at a new open structure, that meant we needed new governance arrangements, and so we decided that perhaps the way around that was to work with the Health and Wellbeing Board, because that is a cross-sector group that touches on many of the agendas that we're interested in across the Children's Partnership. And so we've done quite well at developing that forum side of it, of developing those quarterly meetings, using those to look at what do we know about children and young people, where should our priorities lie, and that then leads us into our draft Children and Young People's Plan, which begins to articulate some of those things. So the plan again isn't statutory anymore. It used to be a statutory document. So now it's something that we can kind of choose the format, the content, and so on. But we agreed that that was a good idea across the partnership, because that gives us a real sort of collective focus and shared idea about where we should be sharing effort and ambition, really. So our plan puts the child at the centre, and our ambition there for every child in Kirklees to have the best start in life. The evidence that we looked at gave us the insight to think about where should the priorities be across the children's population. And we came up with 9 priority areas, really, many of which will be familiar. They're things that will always be a priority. There will always be things that whatever cohort, whatever generation of children we're looking at, we want them to have the best educational outcomes, we want them to have good physical health, we want them to have good emotional and mental health. That there's issues around learning and attainment and gaps in educational attainment. Where should we focus effort around that? And some of the evidence that we looked at was also really pointed up the inequality of outcomes for children from our more deprived areas, and so we wanted to make sure that we always had that lens on the work that we were doing to think, how is that affecting our different population groups? For the first 6 of the 9 outcomes around emotional health and early support and physical health, some things around vulnerability to criminal exploitation, gaps in attainment and outcomes for looked after children, we already had a whole set of arrangements and partnerships and plans in place. And it made no sense for the Children's Partnership to be duplicating that, because that would actually diminish some of that effort. What we needed to create was a good dialogue between what was already happening in those areas and making sure that people across the children's world were aware of that and aware of the contribution they could make to addressing some of those needs and issues. There was 3 further priorities that we felt were things that could only really be properly addressed if we took a systemic cross-partnership approach. No one agency could do these things on their own, and they weren't things that could be done in the short term. So we were looking for tricky, complex issues that needed partnership action, really. And the issue around child poverty came up. So we were looking, one of our priorities this year is about alleviating child poverty, and that fits very much with a parallel piece of corporate work around tackling poverty. So we're weaving those 2 pieces of work together, because again, this isn't separate, it needs to be together. The second is around supporting better inclusion and outcomes for lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender children and young people, because for the first time we have some evidence about those children's experiences, particularly their health experiences, that gave some cause for alarm, really, about really needing to focus on how we include those children and young people in.
So I guess that's where the wordings come from, but that's an interesting point. I guess the other thing that we try, whilst being ambitious, there are certain aspects of national policy and the social situations we can't change. So, for example, the childhood poverty, I'm very careful when I'm talking about the childhood poverty, because what I would describe that as is minimising the impact of poverty on children, because that should be our aspiration if we can't control the wider determinants nationally. But I take your point.
On page 20, at the very bottom, it says young people's, onto page 21, young people's, plural, voice, singular. This sounds as if this voice is a singular entity, but young people are not a homogeneous group. And what I would like to know is how and where will the multitude of voices be heard?
Again, I think another good point. I think part of, as I said earlier, children's voice and involvement now all comes under my directorate, and I've been passionate about it for a number of years, as you'll know. And people have tried to involve children's voice in a number of different ways over the years. So we've had situations where we have, formal boards where selected young people come and sit and give us their opinion, and I think people question the efficacy of that, and actually are those young people representing the whole group? Is it tokenistic? That kind of thing. People have kind of shadow boards to get voice, but I think the principle when we had the discussion at the partnership is that because we actually have a lot of practitioners there and a lot of intelligence, that systemically we want those people to be talking to all the children and young people that they're working with and feeding back in that intelligence and insight into our planning. Now, it may well be that we do some focused work as the year goes on about these priorities. So, for example, the Brunswick Centre, who are leading on some of the LGBT outcomes, have got a number of young people who are performing a young advisors function for them. So what they're doing is they're going out unbeknown to people and inspecting children's services about how they meet the needs of LGBT young people, and we've had feedback about that at the partnership. So I think that it's challenging to work in this more creative way, but I think we're resisting that kind of let's have a formal board of children and young people, because actually it'll make us all work a bit harder on the ground if we have to go out and actively engage.
I'm not suggesting that these things are not being done, but I don't know if and how they are. That's the point I'm coming from. So when I look at the list on page 21 of the priorities, my first question was what young people were involved in deciding these priorities.
Yeah, I was having this conversation this morning actually, because I was in a meeting with Julie Walker, who oversees the Involving Young Citizens Equally project. And when we've had the Children and Young People's Plan over a number of years, we did used to have a Children and Young People's Priority, which, funnily enough, without being patronising about it, ended up being the same thing over about a 5-year period, which was jobs, opportunities and money. And we've got a lot of that insight already from the engagement. And I think what we, again, in terms of those priorities, they do have some children and young people's input because they're based on the Year 9 survey and what children and young people have said themselves. But the next stage is for us to say, are these the right priorities? And if so,
they've got some skills and relevance, but actually, and this thing about them representing the wider, they understand that as a youth counsellor, they're not just there to promote their own, views or the educational institution. There's quite a lot of training going about them understanding the wide representative role, just as we who are councillors who are elected. We're not here just representing our own view, or our own even community. We look at how we can represent the whole. So it's a really good, without setting something else, but to ask them how they want to be involved, because they've got a busy schedule, but actually, it might be really, might be good for them to do that. And sorry if that was a point you were going to make, Dale, but.
Yeah, completely agree. And obviously, because Julie Walker's in the Democracy Commission now, working with Michelle Ross, so we had that conversation this morning. And I believe that there's some evolution of how the Youth Council's going to look as well in place. So it's, but yeah, we've got that in view.
The last statement they would help, can you help us representing the voice, representing the people? And actually, I'm sure it'd be really good for
Yeah.
having met, being at the launch, the current youth council, I'm sure
Yeah.
some of them will be up for that.
Yeah, completely agree.
Any other questions on that? Right, I'm just picking up, so trying to pick up the points that have been made in terms of our priorities. So again, that third column, I think that Timothy referred to, that the element was to be involved in that. Actually, if we know when some forums are taking place, then we can, and two of us can go on to that and be part of that as well. I'm just trying to think. Sorry, I've got that right down. Partnership. Some of that, the focus and how we develop the priorities, that's always been, getting the people involved in that, making sure the priorities are out, and making sure that's followed through. And there's also good quality of people who want to share information, for example, it's looking at the deliverables, what's the overall period of time as well. So, I think we did pick up on this thing about, and there's been the issue about partnership. The council does facilitate things, but not to just, not to take over from. So it does really help when we say, look, this is a genuine partnership. So we pick those up in relation to partnership working on it. So thank you. Very much. Right. Children's scrutiny. Item 9. Sorry. Here, it's not here.
One final question. On page 29, I am now. Now, on tackling child poverty, LGBT inclusion and outcomes to grow our youth offer, each has a how will we do it? Now, on to grow our youth offer, I understand that how. LGBT, I understand that how. Tackling child poverty, how will we do it? I don't understand how. I ask myself, boosting incomes and reducing costs, how? All of them, how? There is no how, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I think we probably need to update that section. What's in there? Those are the 6 domains from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation's ideas on how you should go about tackling poverty. And at the same time as we were developing the children's plan and saying we need to look at the effects of poverty on children, there's a wider piece of work was beginning across the council on refreshing our tackling poverty strategy. And it was decided that we'd go down that line. But I absolutely agree. That sort of gives you some broad headlines. It doesn't give you anything about the mechanisms. And that's because we're still at the point, there's another workshop next week, I think, when we're saying, how are we actually going to practically turn some of those ideas and concerns into pieces of working groups and so on. So I'll make sure I amend that when we know what's happening then. Thanks.
Yeah. It is one of the more complicated. I really like what you said about the Best Start in Life stuff, because some of the worldwide research on equitable societies that are more equitable, I think there's a brilliant book called The Spirit Level. Societies that are more equitable, people tend to be happier. And it's not just the Scandinavian, even countries like Singapore or Japan, where you've got the hot houses and there's implications for that for children and young people's mental health, but they tend to be, on the whole, more happier. And from personal experience, my mum was a teenager when I was born, Dad was still at college, we lived with my grandparents, we had a toilet in the back garden, all that sort of thing. I am, what is the best start in life? I was I was well cared for. I was in a loving environment. I was in an interesting environment, which has stood me in good stead for the rest of my life. So the assumptions we make about, the things that Dale talked about, and at the end of the day, our children are not born in the home counties, they're born in the West Riding. They might be professional parents, they might have parents who are still, still working in manufacturing, the third largest manufacturing district in the whole of the country, and all those assumptions about stuff. And that is the start they've got, and it ought to be the best, and it's like, some of the assumptions that we make should not be reducing that, and the best start. So, and I meet other colleagues. I know, we come from wide areas of Kirklees. Anybody who's listening, it is a wonderful place to be born. It's a wonderful place to live. It's a wonderful place to work. And it's surprising how many people, when they from the home counties come up here, I didn't realise it was like it around it, and it is fantastic. So we need to do. Yeah, that's another story. Yeah. Fine. So anyway, I think that thing about poverty, access and equality, and that's some of those looking at things that works for everybody, not just for particular groups. Brilliant. Right, I think we are going on to item 9, Children's Scrutiny Panel Work Programme and Agenda, brief update. We've not got a formal update on Almonbury Community School at the moment, but I know there's going to be more from it. Is there anything briefly we need to bring up today, Joanne?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, obviously there's been a school holiday in between the previous scrutiny and today, but there are some things that I think will be worthy of updating the panel about in relation to Almonbury Community School. So I think we explained that the school had received a visit, an Ofsted monitoring visit that took place on the 12th and 13th of November. And since last scrutiny, that report has been published. It's available on the Ofsted website. And just to say, in terms of headlines, I would encourage panel members to read that. It states, the headlines are that leaders and managers at the school are taking effective action towards the removal of special measures. So it documents some of the progress that has been made since the special measures judgment, and it talks about the school improvement plan being fit for purpose. So that's really crucial because, of course, there will be a primary school still left there, and it's a triangulation around the safety of youngsters. It's also about the care, time and effort in terms of looking after the educational outcomes of the children that are still on roll at the school. So I'd really encourage you to read that, and we can make that available. Our work since the last scrutiny is absolutely having been able to focus quite rightly on youngsters. We are focusing our attentions around planning for staff transitions. So that is some work that we're planning with the rest of the partnership, the partnership of schools, because we must start that staff engagement. It's really, really important. So we'll be able to bring you some more detail at next scrutiny. The other couple of updates are we highlighted that there'd need to be an evaluation of the building on Greenside Avenue that currently is home to infant age youngsters, and we need to make sure that it's going to be fit for purpose to house primary youngsters so that it's suitable to meet their learning outcomes, and work has begun to assess what is needed, and we'll be able to be in a position to bring back a commission to share with our portfolio holders and Kirklees Council Cabinet shortly, so that that's in place as soon as possible. And there is further work being undertaken in partnership with King James's to progress and the investment in their physical space. So both of those things we should be able to bring you a written update, but I wanted you to be really clear and feel confident that we are working together in partnership at pace on those.
Lovely. Thank you, Joanne. Lovely. Right, looking at the rest of the programme, some slight changes to the March meeting. So I think the exploitation strategy update is going to come back later on, as is the The Academy Trust sponsorship. Right, that's, yeah, so that's, the report on Newsham High is going to be included in the update on Almonbury Community School. That's fine. The data performance is going to be moved to the April meeting. But I think coming back, some good news about elective home education. We've got the final meeting now programmed for looking at that in position. So we're in position to bring a report back to the March meeting for panel to look at, and then for it to go through all the various steps, and then that will go to the April meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee. Go through all those steps. I'm not sure if you've got any format from it. We have had, I think since the last panel meeting, we had a number of visits, haven't we went to, numbers went to Northorpe Hall, very interesting engagement there. Members of the panel went to the one of the multi-agency meetings and some interesting food, and we've got more visits programmed in. Okay. Fine, Linda.
I don't know if now's the time. I just had a query about the future programme. Is that okay? In our tracking our own progress against what we're doing before we get to the programme, on page 35, in relation to the send item, we had flagged for ourselves that a further update report would be considered by the panel at a later date. I can't actually see it on any of the future meetings, though.
We discussed that at the briefing the other day.
Thank you. I think we'd absolutely welcome being able to bring you back a progress report. I believe it was around about September time when we updated you from the work that had been undertaken about that in-depth review. I think it's particularly important that you understand we gave you last time an overview of our 10-point improvement plan for across the piece for youngsters with special educational needs and disabilities. So we'd really welcome the opportunity to bring back a report, Chair, and hopefully we might be able to do that round about March time, if it's possible to agenda that.
I think we were going to look at the new municipal year, but actually we might, given that we've moved some things around, if we can get it back to the March meeting, right, we'll try and do that. Okay, sorry, Linda.
Can I raise one other as well? Just not to lose sight of the opportunity we were given about the independent reviewing officer. I think that would be really useful.
Yeah, to programme that in for one of the visits. Yeah, okay. Right, that's lovely. I think dates of future meetings. I think we're going to try and move the dates of the meeting in public, the timing of the meeting in public forward by half an hour. Hopefully we're already diarised in to be in earlier than anyway. So we're going to try and start at 10:30 on the 13th of March and at 10:30 on the 17th of April to give us longer time for discussion in public. So that's fine. So, thank you very much for comments and contributions from panel members. Thank you very much for contributions and responses to questions from officers who have attended. The date of our next meeting is the 13th of March 2020, and it will be streaming, all being well, from 10:30 a.m. Thank you very much, everybody.